Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting of the General Government Committee to order. And may we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Dennehy. Absent. Councilmember Schmischer.
Here.
Councilmember B. Smith. Absent. Councilmember Stein.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy. Here. Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Thank you. So tonight we have two topics we're going to be discussing, contractor licensing ordinance and also a potential shopping cart ordinance. And Ryan, who are we going to turn this over to?
Yeah, so the contractor licensing ordinance, we found a couple areas that we'd like to clean up in the licensing. I'll turn it over to Kathy Olsh, our building official, to talk about that.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. There's been certain sections of the ordinance that need more detailed clarification of the language. Part of it is ICC testing is the only accepted test in many jurisdictions, and no other jurisdiction allows another jurisdiction's test if it's not the ICC test. Many jurisdictions have their own ICC test that it might say Denver ICC or Kansas ICC or Texas ICC. That is very acceptable. But there are some smaller jurisdictions, let's just say, for instance, Silver Cliff, they give their own handwritten test and it's not accredited by ICC. So we wouldn't want to accept that test, only an ICC test.
Mm-hmm. And Kathy, what does ICC stand for?
International Code Council.
Council, thank you.
And then we have trade licenses that are allowed to carry up to 4 different trades in 1 year period and should not be allowed to change those trades in a 1 year period. If they would like to change a trade during that 1 year period, they should be required to complete the ICC test and become a general contractor. So we've had many people that come in and might take out 4 different trades, and then mid-year, they want to come in and say, oh, I don't want to do drywall anymore, I want to do roofing, but I have 4 trades. And we shouldn't be able to give them, if they really want more than 4 trades, they're a general contractor and they need to go test under International Code Council and become a GC. And then now we have, we needed more clarification of language and more specific timeframes for revoking or suspending licenses. We had a hearing in the past here, and we found some glitches that we didn't have language in there that give us specifications. So we would like to put some specifications in the ordinance. Any questions, concerns?
And we'll just be kind of informal here this evening, so please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I did have a couple of questions. One, have we reached out to the contractors that are currently licensed through the city?
We have not. I have not.
Okay. So I think it would be really important to make sure that they're aware that we're considering changes, to make sure that they are able to have a voice in the changes that are being proposed. Second, how many of our current contractors are not ICC test certified? Like, how many of our current contractors will this actually impact?
This is more for contractors who are coming from another jurisdiction that want to be licensed in the city, not necessarily somebody who is already licensed in the city.
I'm assuming, though, that there are contractors who have come here from other jurisdictions who have used the licensure exams that they took in another jurisdiction to receive licensure here?
Yes.
So I'm wondering how many of our current contractors, there aren't a lot of contractors in town, and it can be really, really difficult to find a contractor. So I would just like to know how many of our current contractors do we anticipate that change would impact?
I don't think it would really impact any of them, because most of them that come here, they've already ICC tested, because in their jurisdiction, they had to ICC test. So if they're coming, let's say, from another state, a lot of other states have their own ICC test, or they've taken the ICC test. United States-wide, almost all jurisdictions require an ICC test for general contractors.
Okay, I guess I'm a little bit confused about why this change is needed then.
Well, we have some smaller jurisdictions. We just are trying to put more clarification in there. So if we have somebody come, and I'll just use this for an example, Florence. Florence doesn't require you to have an ICC exam to become a general contractor. They give their own written exam, which is not accredited through International Code Council. So that exam is just made up of whatever questions they decide to make up. So what we're saying is they can't come from Florence with that exam because it's not an ICC exam, and then get a general contractor's license with our jurisdiction.
I think what we run into is that we have contractors that come to Canyon City and they expect one-for-one reciprocity.
Sure.
And that's not always the case. So if we could spell it out in the code to make it clearer that, the ICC is the standard that we're looking for, that's the clarification that we're looking for in the code.
Sure, I just think it would be really helpful to know how many of our current contractors, because it wasn't clarified in the code before, would be impacted by this before we
Well, they already
change the
have their
ordinance.
license.
Yeah, so this doesn't, as I understand it, this doesn't take away a grandfather status, for instance. So if you have a license, you continue to have a license.
That's correct.
The code already has a requirement to pass an exam or something similar, right?
How
That's-
often do you have to pass that exam?
Once, that's it.
Okay, so if they have already been grandfathered in and they already have a city license, it would just be new.
New, moving
Contractors.
forward.
Right, so once and remain in good standing, correct?
What's that?
Remain in good
As long as they
standing.
remain in
Yes.
good
Yeah.
standing.
Yes.
And you
Right.
want a contractor that knows the code.
That's
Because
correct.
that is a protection to you as a builder. They need to know what's going on so that they can take
Absolutely.
care of it from scratch. Yeah.
That is correct.
And then my second question is just around the 4 trades. How many of our current, how often does that happen? That you have contractors that come in who have had 4 trade licenses issued within a particular year and want to swap those out? I'm trying to get a sense of what kind of impact these changes will actually have on our contractors.
I've
in our
only had
community.
2 ask, and I've turned them down both times, saying that they needed to keep their 4 trades for that year or go test. Most of them are handyman services that want to do a little bit of everything. A lot of them, I've had probably 6 or 7 go and test for the residential test and pass it and come in, and then they only need 1 license. They don't need to pay for a 4 trades license anymore. So it's probably, on an average, this year I've only had 2 requested.
Okay, that's good to know. I would still like to see some outreach done to current contractors in the city to make sure that they have a chance to weigh in and have input on these changes, because it will impact them, both in the sense of wanting to make sure that other city licensed contractors are up to snuff and kind of meet those minimum requirements that the mayor was talking about, but also because it's impacting their livelihood and they deserve to know that it's happening and have a voice. So I'd really like to see that outreach happen before it comes to council for first reading.
I can send an email out tomorrow to all of them, a mass email.
Awesome, thank you so much.
John,
Yes.
quick question, show my ignorance here. What is the issue, or is there an issue, when you have somebody that's saying they're building their own house? It's my understanding they can act as their own general counsel if it's for their own house. Is that true or not?
That is true. They do not have to be a licensed contractor.
Okay, what do you do when you find out that they're actually building the house for resale to begin with?
Then that becomes a problem. They would need to test and become an a general contractor.
Okay,
So,
I know of somebody, so, okay, thank you.
So further question along those lines, if someone buys a house that they're restoring, will they need some licensure from the city to do that? So they're not for their own personal use, but to flip it, essentially. They buy the house, they restore it, and then they sell it. Would they need a license to do that?
most generally, no, because they are the owner of the home. But if they hire subcontractors to come in and help them, let's say installation, drywall, mechanical work, then yes, they do need to get licensed subcontractors.
They need licensed subcontractors, but that's not a requirement for them to get a license.
That's correct.
Sure. And that makes sense.
Emily has.
Yes,
her hand.
Emily.
My questions, just a couple of questions in regard to some wording in the ordinance itself, whenever we're ready for that.
Sure.
Okay, both of my questions are on the first page of the ordinance, and the first one's really small, minor, but in section 1A, where it says, "The building official shall issue a license to contractors who have passed the International Code Council ICC examination and that meet all other requirements of this chapter." I'm thinking that should and who meet, so that's just a kind of a wording issue. And then the other question I have on that page, I just wanted some clarification about why the word revocation is being deleted. Oh, for example, in section 2A3. I just needed some clarification about why revocation language is changing, and is revocation defined somewhere in our code?
I think we would turn that over to Catherine.
So I thought the revocation was deleted in 3 because it was addressed in the new number 5.
That's correct. That's the answer to that question. Thank you, Mayor. The answer to your second question is probably not, I want to say, but it's also not needed. Revocation is a commonly used term that it's not a matter for confusion. I don't think. I've never had an issue with that.
So is there anything in this existing language or new language that says whether someone whose license has been revoked can have it reinstated, and what the process is for that? I'm just a little unclear. I understand the meaning of the word suspension versus revocation, but I'm not sure how that's being used in our work.
So, no, I don't believe there is a process to have it reinstated, because the change that we made in 5 there, I think on page 1, basically says, once it's been revoked, let's say it's been revoked in the city, that's easier than another jurisdiction, but it qualifies another jurisdiction as well. But let's say the city revokes a license. So under that section 2 of the ordinance, that's the denial section. So we can say, no, for 5 years, you can't come back and even ask for a license if we've revoked it. So after that period, that's not grounds for denial. So they could come back, take the exam again, and apply for a contractor's license.
Although the language in A says the building official may deny. So I just wonder if there's still a little bit too much that's up to interpretation there.
I think it's fine, honestly. I mean, the things that are listed there are grounds for denial if they decide to deny the license. And so our goal was, what we didn't have before was, we only had a revocation period for about a year. And our concern was, especially with a recent experience we had, is we really were concerned that this person was taking advantage of citizens in Canyon and operating and defrauding them. And so we wanted a longer period in there. And so that can be grounds for denial of a license. But I think the other side of that coin is they have a window of 5 years after it being revoked that they should not be applying for a license. If it concerns council, we can say just black and white, you may not apply for a license for a period of 5 years after it's been revoked. If that concerns you, we can find another place for that to go.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a strong feeling either way, just that if there are already issues of interpretation, that we would want to be sure to pin down as much as we could. So I don't know, if others have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear that.
I felt when I read it, it was pretty explanatory. I didn't have any questions lingering.
I guess I'm just wondering, do building official Ulsh or city administrator Stevens, do you see the need for that flexibility? Or like, is there ever an instance in those 7 scenarios where you would need to say yes? Or should we just change it from may deny to will deny?
I think, having the ability to have the flexibility is, it's helpful. This type of situation doesn't come up very often. I think, one time since I've been the city administrator, 2 or 3 times since you've been with the building department.
I've been in the building department over 20 years now, and I've only seen the previous building official revoked 1 license, and this is the second one I've seen revoked.
On the issue of may versus will, if it's will and you don't dot an I or cross a T, then it will be denied, as opposed to having an opportunity to amend the application. So,
Yeah,
so it may be
yeah,
appropriate.
and there could be, there's, we've had 2 different scenarios, but there could be other scenarios that we're not, that may need some flexibility.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Thank you for presenting this to us and being here to answer our questions. I think that we're ready to, and since this is just a kind of a ready for prime time discussion tonight, right?
Correct, yeah. Any corrections that need to be made, we'll make. Kathy will reach out to the contractors, kind of let them know we've got some changes coming, and then we'll set it for a council agenda.
Sorry, just to be clear, I would want it to be not that we've got changes coming, but that we're considering a new ordinance that would have changes, and we very much welcome and value their input in that
Maybe
deliberative process.
Let them know which date it'll be on the agenda. So if they have concerns, they let council know.
Okay. That all seems very appropriate. And so now we're going to move on to, and thank you again for being
Thank you.
here.
Thank you, Kathy.
Shopping carts. I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun with this one, too.
I'll turn this over to the police department. We've seen an uptick in number of shopping carts that are not in retail store shopping centers or parking lots around town, on the streets, in the right-of-way, in the parks, or on the Riverwalk. And this is one suggestion to try and address some of these issues. I know the police department has done a lot of legwork here, and I'll turn it over to Commanders Bell and Leonard to talk about what they've done and what the need for this ordinance can potentially help us address.
Madam Mayor and Council, I want to thank you for the time.
Yeah,
There we go. How about that?
that's better.
Thank you for the time to come before you and talk to you about this. Over the last few years, we've seen an uptick in a lot of shopping carts being utilized for the purposes of transportation of personal property by people who are not authorized necessarily to take these shopping carts off of these retail store locations. And they are basically using it for their own purpose and then abandoning the cart when they're done. A lot of these carts have been found in camping areas and generally are filled with trash or among trash and other unsanitary places. And we've collected a lot of these carts over the course of the last couple of years. We've managed to work with some of the retailers to get those carts back to them. However, there hasn't been a vehicle through which we've been able to prosecute people for actually taking those types of carts. And mainly it's because of the intent that is hard to prove that surround the ordinances and the laws around theft. So one of the things that I did was I started researching what other municipalities and jurisdictions have been using in order to try to curb the shopping cart theft is what it really is, and a lot of those jurisdictions have some pretty good ideas. And we worked with our city attorneys in drafting an ordinance that we think would help to alleviate people from taking those shopping carts from those retail establishments and using it for their own purposes. And that's the ordinance that's sitting before you right now. It's something that we're going to have to, we've actually gone and talked to a lot of the retail establishments. They are all on board with something to help curb this. The average shopping cart is about $300. So every time one of those gets taken, it does weigh heavy on the retail establishment. So we want to try to help them out. And the ordinance gives us the authority to be able to take those when we see them and they're not on the property. But it also not only protects the retail establishment, but it also puts a little bit of the onus on the retail establishment also, because we need them and we got to partner with them in order to accomplish this. So that's basically why we're here.
Okay, thank you. So questions, comments? I think there's actually quite, we probably should reiterate some of the comments we had prior to the meeting for the benefit of the public here. But from my perspective, we're actually doing kind of two things with this. We're creating the ability to when these acts of theft occur, deal with it in a more criminal matter than we're able to now. And also, I think that the other thing that this does is this gives us a mechanism to deal with carts that are still being used by somebody. They're pushing them around, haven't been abandoned, and give us a way to deal with that issue too. Abandoned carts we're already dealing with. I think that's fair to say. Is that correct?
It is, but by the time we get our hands on them, they're usually basically destroyed.
Trash. Mm-hmm. Understand. One of the things that and I see your hand up there, Emily. I'll get to you in just a second. One of the things, my wife and I were over in California, I don't know, 3 years ago or so, and we went shopping at Safeway, and we were happily pushing our purchases out to our car, which we had to park a little bit of ways away from the store to find a space. And we got a certain distance away, and all the wheels locked up, and we were kind of stuck because there was no sign indicating that was going to happen. And it would seem to me that there's, in addition to the requirements that we have in here, it would seem important to me to include a requirement to establishments that have the electronic locking wheels on their carts, just to have a sign at the exit or something that says wheels may lock up if more than 100 feet away, or some notice to the public that, maybe everybody in California knew that that was going to happen, but we sure didn't. And it
Well,
was.
if you're on TikTok, That would have helped. You would have known.
That explains it. Yeah, Emily, go ahead, please.
Thanks. I just have a couple of things in regard to the wording. I do think the ordinance reads well and is clear, so it's good to see. At the bottom of page 2 of the ordinance, under C1, where it says sign affixed to cart, every shopping cart shall have a sign permanently affixed to it. We might want to add some wording there saying something about what needs to be on that sign, like identifying the owner of the cart or something to that effect. And then on the top of the next page, under number 3, where there's a requirement for the store to have a shopping cart inventory, it suggests to me that carts would need some kind of unique identifier, whether they're numbered or whatever it is. How else do you have an inventory? I mean, it would just say cart, cart, cart if you didn't have any unique identifier for carts. So we might need to add some language there and say what's expected in order to, I mean, if we're going to require them to have an inventory, we have to say more about what that needs to look like.
And I have, on that realm, I had some questions too, like, are we really expecting them to have these permanently affixed signs that can't be ripped off? Does having a handlebar with the engravings Safeway across it adequate enough to mark it as this belongs to Safeway?
So most all, if not all, of the establishments that we went to, all of their shopping carts are currently already marked, in a way that I would consider it to be permanent. Now, if there's additional language that needs to be on that marking, like this cart shall not be removed from the property or something along those lines, I did not see that on there. So
Right,
don't
well, I think the ordinance
City
just
Market
asks there
has
for to
that.
be signs.
Correct.
Yeah, they just, as far as like, they should not be moved, I was under the impression those are just like signs that are like at the grocery store
Correct.
itself or in the park.
So that's the other part of the ordinance. So the establishment would have to put signage out in the parking lot and at the store, letting people know, educating them that they're not to remove the shopping cart from the establishment property.
Do you think if there's a sign that the people who want to take a shopping cart are gonna give a flip if there's a sign saying that or not?
No.
Like, is it really serving a purpose, or is it just a legal thing?
Well, it does give us the authority to be able to say there was proper signage at that particular establishment. You're currently in control of a cart that belongs to somebody that's not you. And unless you have a written letter authorizing you by the owner to be in possession of that cart, I'm taking the cart. And you're going to get a ticket for being in possession of it.
So that kind of goes to your hand, like you wanted to have the notice that the wheels would lock. So
Yeah.
kind of a similar thing, say there was notice given.
Yes. Yeah,
Like you did pass a sign that said 30 miles per hour. Did you see that when you were going 40?
that's correct.
So wouldn't it save a lot of time and money for both the grocery store owners and any department store that would have those, and yourselves, if they just use the same technology they use for inventory in the store? Maybe they could engrave something that could be scanned?
Like a UPC code or something?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And that way it'd be quicker for you to know who it belonged to, and then it would also be quicker for them to do that inventory if we're going to require it. I don't know if there's a way to permanently affix that, because they use little tags, like self-stick tags, and those they wouldn't hold up in the weather.
I'm just worried about the cost and burden on our stores. It's
But they
our-
already have that technology that they use inside the store. So, and those carts are worth more than a can of beans.
But that's their personal decision to do that. That's not, I don't know if
Right.
that's our job to legislate them to do.
But we already said, we have already in this thing, it says shopping cart inventory. The plan shall
Right.
include, we're asking them to put together a plan, and it says, number 3, the plan shall include a complete list of all shopping carts maintained on or in the business premises. Now, doing that is going to take, they're going to have an employee physically count those carts. I think that technology is available, and they have it, they use it for their products in the
But
store.
that's their choice. Do they want to choose to have an employee count them, or do they want to choose to put microchipping, whatever, sensors on there? That's their choice to do that.
But their choice is not whether or not to do it, if we put it in
And
the,
how they do it. And inventory is, at least the reading I was doing on other businesses, it was like, we started the Christmas season with 600 carts. At the end of the Christmas season, we only had 550 carts. It wasn't like we tracked them down with,
Individual.
cart number 5 and 15 are gone. It's just, they just need to know the total. They're all the same carts.
So I have a question that may help here. What is the purpose, or what is the information that we want on the sign?
On the sign that goes in the parking lot?
On the cart.
That-
On the
that-
cart.
That the carts are not to be removed from the property.
No, the sign on the cart.
On the cart? Same.
Yes.
Well, I think the marking on the cart just needs to mark it who or what the retail establishment is that owns it.
I think that's what we need to clarify on there. Like, if it says Walmart on the handle or Walmart on the side, is that sufficient for us to let us know this belongs to Walmart?
So-
Instead of having to go weld something really specific and special.
Well, and
So
if I
what-
may, the vast majority of the stores that we went to when we were researching all this, they already have it marked. Dollar Tree, City Market, Walmart.
That's great. So
Right.
what we're trying to do is match the language up to
Right.
whatever
To
the
what's
situation is. And I think there that every shopping cart shall have some indication or markings of ownership on it, rather than saying the
Right.
sign. Because then it can be the handle, it can be any tags that they want to have. And that's
Right.
separate from the question of
Inventory.
inventory, exactly. Did you have something else, Emily?
No, I just am hoping that we do talk about the inventory issue, that if we want them to have an inventory, to me, that implies they need unique identifiers for each cart, rather than just total numbers. But, I mean, maybe I'm reading that wrong.
I mean, they don't inventory their store and say cornflakes box number 1, cornflakes box number 2. It's,
I think it might be helpful to talk about the purpose of the inventory.
Correct.
And then that might
Right.
give us a little bit
Yeah.
more
Yes.
visibility on what information needs to be included in that inventory. What are you hoping to gain from that?
I can honestly tell you that in our talks with the retail establishments, they generally just know the number of carts that they have. But I can tell you that the amount of carts that are ultimately getting taken is, they can tell that they have some that are missing, but they have no vehicle through which, in order to go track them down and find them, until we call them, right?
is it important for them to have an actual official inventory?
I don't.
Does that really serve a big purpose here
I
for what we're
don't
trying
think
to
so.
accomplish?
Honestly, I don't think that it does. I think that basically if they can tell us the number of carts that they are supposed to have, that would be beneficial for us in order to determine how many are actually out there.
And it does look like Catherine Sellers has her hand up as well.
Oh, thank you. Catherine?
So we're not, that is, the intention of that section is not to require them to number their carts and tell us exactly which cart is missing. It does help with enforcement to know that carts are missing. So if they have 300 carts and now they have 300, or they have 295, we know that 5 carts are missing. So it goes to enforcement and prosecution. So it is an important overall number to have, but we don't care if it's number 5 or whatever. If they want to do that, more power to them, but I don't think we're interested in any of that information.
Right. So maybe we can just clarify the language there as to what we mean by a cart inventory. That it's just what you said, that at any point in time that they know the total number of carts that they own in order to convey how many are missing.
Are we then?
Because
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Tracy.
Oh,
please.
sorry, I just was going to finish the sentence to say that then we can be clearer there, that we're not asking for a list of specific carts, either by number or name or letter or whatever.
And then we may also want to add, how often are we asking them to update us on the complete number of carts that they have? Whether that's on an annual basis or quarterly basis, or kind of what the expectation is.
Well, I think, so from an enforcement perspective, and I think what Catherine was so, the best way that I could tell you is like a scenario. So if I come across somebody and they're in possession of a cart and it's from Walmart, it's clearly marked, I can call Walmart and I can say, hey, how many carts are you guys missing? Well, we're missing X number. Well, okay, then I can take that one. I can be safe to assume that that particular cart belongs to our particular Walmart, and we can retrieve that and get it back to them. In hindsight, also, if I were to see the same situation, they're like, yeah, last time we checked, we didn't have any missing. That's a different scenario, right? So I think that's the importance of having the actual inventory and making sure that they know, or there's somebody that we can check with to be able to tell if they actually are missing the cart.
That's super helpful. Thank you for giving that scenario, Commander Bell. I wonder then if, in addition to saying, like, as Councilwoman Tracy was saying, the plan shall include a total number of shopping carts maintained on or in the business premises that is updated on an ongoing basis and shared with Canyon City law enforcement upon request, or something like that, just so that it's clear what the expectation is of the business, because that's how we're intending to use the information.
And that sounds like good language to me, but I would suggest that we do specify something, because, you know, we don't want to create outlaws here because they didn't count their carts yesterday or something, you know? So, you know, a quarterly update or yearly update, or, you know, semi-annual
Or upon a
update.
request.
Or upon
So
request.
we don't really need to know how many shopping carts you have unless we found 5 of them down on the Riverwalk, and then we need to know.
Exactly. And then that way we're not creating any onerous burden for a quarterly report that we may not need. If it's just upon request, then it's because the shopping cart has been found that we have probable cause to believe is theirs.
So if, from an enforcement standpoint, if there's an individual that has a cart that's marked Walmart, okay, and this law is in effect, or this ordinance is in effect, and we want to enforce against that individual, and maybe this is a question for Catherine, but is it a defense to say, well, but I stole this one from Salida, you know?
Well, that's why there's two-pronged, because there's one thing for the shopping carts, and there's two-pronged. You can't have a shopping cart, period, in Canyon City. Is that right?
I guess my first step would be to call Walmart and find out if they're missing shopping carts. And if they are missing shopping carts, I don't think that it's reasonable to assume that somebody pushed one all the way down from Salida. I mean, it could be, but if they actually genuinely, I don't know that I would necessarily battle that, but I would take the cart regardless, because it's not one that he should have had to begin with, and if he admits that he stole it, we're dealing with another issue. And again, you can more easily prove intent in that particular sense, but I think you could get lost in the gray all day on this. This basically just gives us the ability to be able to make contact with somebody who's got a cart to begin with, right? And try to get that back to the establishment that's missing it.
Quick question, do we know what retail stores do with carts that have lived their lives? I mean, do they put them out back by their big dumpster? Do they gather them together and take them to a recycling place? Because what I'm thinking is, frankly, you might find carts that had been disposed of by the store itself, and these people help themselves to, I guess I'm just trying to make a hypothesis, but I'm guessing that there are going to be situations to where the carts were no longer of usable use, except for the person who has it now. And so I guess I'm just wondering how they got them. Is there a way for them to have gotten it that they're going to come up with as an excuse?
Well, that's a good question, and one that I can go back to the establishments and ask. I would imagine, though, that most of them probably recycle those. I can't say that for a
I
fact.
mean,
though.
if that was an issue or a problem, I'm just thinking from the reading I did of what other jurisdictions do, they actually they find the stores. So if there's a shopping cart that is off of their premises, that store gets a fine for that, which motivates them to guard their shopping carts very carefully.
Locking wheels.
Like locking wheels and keeping them inside and really protecting them. And there was a case, I can't remember which city it was in, but there was a Walmart that wanted to get a building permit. But at storage, I think there was impounded like $23,000 worth of shopping cart fines that Walmart had accrued, and they couldn't get their permit until they paid that fine over all of these shopping carts that had been stolen off of their premises. This ordinance does not go there.
No, it doesn't.
But, I mean, I think some communities have apparently gone to that level of shopping cart problems that they felt like they needed to.
On the inventory question again, and then I'll get to you, Amy, but on the inventory question again, is that really any information that we can act on if they say that they've got missing carts? I mean, if we talk to, I think that's a given, pretty much. If you've got shopping carts, there's gonna be some missing, you know, almost as soon as the people start using them. So is there a value or virtue really in having an inventory requiring the, commercial establishments to create such an inventory? Because it seems to me there's always going to be some missing, and if all we do is call and say, hey, you got some missing, and they say, yeah, then does that trigger or not trigger some action on our part? I mean, if it doesn't, if it's not really necessary for us to have that information to be able to enforce this ordinance, maybe we don't need them to have an inventory.
Catherine, is that your hand still up?
No, that's my hand up again. So I do think it's important from perspectives of prosecution, for the prosecutor to be able to show that and what can be inferred from that information for the court. So I would advocate leaving it in. I also think that Commander Bell has illustrated why it's important from an enforcement perspective, because it can dictate maybe which avenue he takes or PD takes in enforcing it. So it is valuable to both the prosecution and PD to have that information. It's a component in a bigger group of tools for prosecution.
And that seems a sufficient and necessary answer to keep it in, yeah.
I have just a curious question. In your interactions with shopping carts around town, how many do you feel like are actually from our local businesses, or versus how many have been brought in from other?
All of them
Think
have
all of
been
them are
from
from
our local businesses, yeah.
businesses.
And I could put that in perspective for you. While we were out walking around and talking to the prospective retail establishments, Safeway specifically advised us at the time, the second time we went in to go talk to them, that they had just ordered $14,000 worth of shopping carts because they were missing that many. So that's the problem that we're actually looking at from a realistic perspective, and that's just one retail establishment.
While you were talking to them, did you ask them about, are you keeping your shopping carts in at night? What are you doing to, control access? Are you okay with putting up signs?
Yes, so we did talk to them, and I was very specific with them that there would be some onus on the retail establishment to do some things like signage, like marking the carts, that type of thing, which, all of them were, the ones that we saw, they were already marked. They were willing to put up the signs. They wanted more clarification on what exactly the signage would say. So that was one of the questions that they asked, and I said, well, I don't have that information yet. We're infant stages of this thing, so I'm going to have to get back to you on that. But I can tell you, they try to corral their carts back, right? And all of our establishments have the cart corrals, and they have employees that will go out there and collect the carts. But I can tell you, staffing shortages are probably affecting that. And so when you have limited employees that you can actually send out to collect shopping carts out of the parking lot, versus restocking shelves, they're gonna be restocking the shelves with those employees versus collecting those carts out of the lot. So some stores are better than others about collecting the carts and getting them back into the establishment. But that's what we found.
Did you ask them about their willingness to create and submit a control plan?
Not specifically.
That's actually one of my significant concerns about the ordinance as it's currently drafted. It goes into effect 5 days after it's published.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's enough time realistically for businesses to come into compliance. It sounds like a lot of them already have their carts signed, or have a permanent naming convention on their carts in some way, but to come up with the inventory, to come up with a written control plan that would be submitted, to come up with a new staffing pattern that would allow them to collect their carts every night if that's currently a challenge. I just don't think 5 days is reasonable. So I think we would definitely want to extend that, not an undue amount, but to make sure that we're giving them sufficient time to be able to come into compliance.
I felt like a grace period that's more realistic would be better too. And as far as like the signage to put at their store and maybe at their corrals, I wondered if we shouldn't design that signage so it says exactly what we expect it to say and want it to say. Or
Their legal department is going to want to have a say in that.
or at least give them the content that
Right.
suggested
Yeah, they would want
content.
time to really look at it.
Mhm.
Because they have a lot of things they have to consider.
That's a
I
good
also
point.
think from one perspective is that we're looking at a lot of the same stores and other locations, and for us to define the actual wordage where they may be doing it elsewhere, they may all be ordering in huge quantities of carts at one time and having them dispersed to different stores. So I would be a little bit concerned of saying this is exactly what it has to stay on there, because Pueblo or Salida.
Yeah, I mean, the sign like in the store says you can't take shopping carts. or
Okay,
at
so
the
not
cart.
on each cart, but.
Yeah, just the
Right.
actual
Okay,
sign
gotcha.
at the store. Because you
The
said
premises sign.
there was concern about what do we put on this sign, like, I thought, well, maybe we better give them the information.
Right, during my time of researching ordinances, I can tell you that there are multiple, ordinances span the globe on this particular topic. Everything from holding the retail establishment completely responsible for making sure that they keep their carts, all the way to if we see people walking down the street with a cart, we're just going to assume that they've stolen it and we're going to arrest them. So it go in everywhere in between. When I was talking to the retail establishments, most of them already had spoken to corporate offices, their loss prevention people. They all, again, because there's so many different types of ordinances out there, these retail establishments, which are mostly national chains, they have to kind of work within those particular realms. I would imagine that whatever we ask them to do or within this ordinance as it's written, they would be able to come up with signage pretty quick, probably because they already have it in place somewhere else, right? So that would be my, or at least that's my impression when I was talking to them.
So when you mentioned that, some of them say if you see somebody cruising around town with a shopping cart that they take it immediately. I guess that's my question here, is that what, if you find somebody cruising around town with a shopping cart, what's the scenario? How's this gonna play out?
We're going to stop them and ask them why they're in possession of that cart. And if they cannot produce a letter authorizing them to have that cart, then we're going to take it. And we're going to take it back to the retail establishment, or we're going to notify the retail establishment and store the cart so that they can make arrangements to come and pick it up. The person who's in possession of it is going to get cited for a municipal violation, and they're going to be required to go to court for violating that ordinance.
So I see that the title of E is disposition of removed and abandoned shopping carts, but then most of the language under E is just about abandoned shopping carts and what will happen with them. I'm assuming under D2, which is to be in possession of a shopping cart that has been removed, it's unlawful.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if under E, we also need to say that this is what happens. This is the disposition for removed shopping carts, so that it's clear that this is what will happen. No, so what we're talking about is E, so what actually happens to the shopping cart, and what happens to the possessions. So I think that we would want that to apply to both if the shopping cart was abandoned and if it was a shopping cart that you found somebody, tooling around with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's covered in the title, but we may just need to carry that through the provisions underneath. Catherine, thoughts or perspectives on that?
I don't know. I don't really see any harm, I guess, in making that change. I think it's defined above, so I don't think I'm overly concerned about that it needs to be made, but I think it's harmless. The terms are used interchangeably a little bit, so we can clean that up.
Well, except for, like you said, it says it says abandoned, but if somebody's using it actively, that's not abandoned.
I think it's
stolen and being
defined,
used.
the term that's defined is abandoned or removed shopping cart. So I think if we're consistent throughout the ordinance by using that terminology, I would feel a little bit more comfortable about it.
What?
Yeah, abandoned doesn't mean it's abandoned. Abandoned means that the person's removed it from the premises. So it doesn't have its normal terminology. Like you're thinking like it's just sitting there by itself. That's not necessarily required under that definition up above on page 2.
Sure, it's just that the term that we're defining on page 2 is abandoned or removed shopping cart. So I think it could be confusing. So if I would just do one or the other, either clean up the definition or clean up the terminology later on to match the definition.
So going back to the scenario, there's somebody there, you say, I'm going to take your shopping cart, this is an abandoned or removed shopping cart, it's against the law, and I'm going to cite you. What's the practicality that you have a vehicle that's going to be able to do that right then and there? Considering your staff, your staffing issues that you have, and then what do you do with all that stuff? Are you going to take all that stuff at that time too, or are you just going to say, here's a garbage can or garbage sack, good luck, and then we're just going to find it a block down littering the street?
No, so the process would be that obviously we would give them an opportunity to remove their possessions, and if they can get all of those possessions, great. If they can't, then we're going to give them a reasonable amount of time, depending on how quickly we need to actually get this done, right? But what will happen is if they can't do it within our time frame, we will store their possessions for a certain amount of time. We already have that. We can book it into safekeeping. We do it now. We already do this. And we would take the shopping cart and do the same. The shopping cart would also get stored, and unless the retail establishment can come and get it right then. We do have the ability to call in our code enforcement officers or our park officers to be able to come. They have vehicles that will be able to transport shopping carts. So from that perspective, we can get it done. It is going to be, at least a hurdle, at least initially, for our officers to kind of get used to a new process as far as that goes. But again, we're going to give them the opportunity to remove their personal possessions from it, and then we'll deal with the rest on the back end. We're already doing this in the abandoned camps that we find. We have camps all over, like when we run into these camps, we mark them, for 3 days. At the end of 3 days, we have to come back, and our parks department really does help with that. They load up all of what is considered possession, and they throw away what they consider to be the stuff that is not possession. We store their possessions for the 30 days that's required, and if nobody comes and claims it, then it also gets disposed of.
Yeah, it's just a little bit different because they get a 3-day notice for a place that's really established and it's not mobile.
Right.
This is something that's mobile.
Right.
Makes it a little different. Do you see that this could be a situation that could escalate when you confront someone with a shopping cart?
I mean, there's always that chance, especially when you consider, the folks that we're dealing with. A lot of them have mental health issues, substance abuse issues. There's always that possibility, but I have all the faith in the world in our officers. They have the ability to be able to talk to these folks. We can also get them in touch with our homeless coalition people, giving them the resources that they need in order to facilitate whatever it is that they're looking for. We have our co-responder unit. I have all the faith in the world that our officers would be able to help try to de-escalate these types of situations should they get there.
So let's go back to the shopping cart itself. You take the shopping cart, you may or may not take the possessions. And you say the shopping cart, either you'll drop it off at the store, or are you going to take it to the CCPD and hope that they come and pick it up?
The ordinance gives us the ability to take the shopping cart, go back to put it in storage. We have 7 days to notify the retail establishment, and then they have 30 days to pick it up, if I'm not mistaken. If they don't pick it up, then we can dispose of it however we need to dispose of it. I assume that the officers will try to get a hold of the retail establishment and say, hey, Safeway, we have one of your carts down here. Do you have somebody that can come pick this up, or do you want us to bring it to you? That's all within the interpretation of how the officer decides to deal with it at the time. I would be okay with either of those circumstances under that.
Yeah, I think I would like to see, if we, upon passing this and have the grace period, and then maybe kind of revisit a little bit down the road, 6 months or whatever, and see, okay, how is this ordinance working for us? Do we need to tweak it? Is there things that we need to do to make this a little bit better for everybody?
Sure.
I have two questions about E1. So it states the city may remove any abandoned shopping cart from public property or private property open to the public, and it continues. Just wanted to clarify, when it says the city, are we expecting CCPD to be doing this, or are we expecting other entities within the city? Is that purposefully broad, or was that?
I will tell you that we use the other departments if we can, only because we're stretched pretty thin. So we will call, like, our Parks Department helps us out greatly. Jesse with Parks, Rex, all those guys, they're great. I've actually utilized the Street Department once. And Tony Falgene and his guys came down and helped us with a car, and it was a makeshift cart. It wasn't an actual shopping cart that we're talking about, but a makeshift cart. The guy abandoned literally in the middle of the roundabout. So they came out and we were able to load that up pretty quick and get it out of the way.
Okay.
But,
Thank
yeah.
you. That's helpful.
It's an overall
then-
team effort.
Yeah.
And then I also just wanted to clarify, what does private property open to the public mean?
Private property open to the public is like City Market, Safeway, Walmart. That's private property. It's privately owned, but it's open to the public.
Okay, so if the shopping cart were abandoned, say, in a private business owner's,
Correct.
business owner, because it can be open to the public, but if it's abandoned in a private individual's yard or right of way, that would not be accessible to the city to
Not necessarily, no. It would be up to the private property owner to have it removed or call us to remove it. I would assume that we would go and help them out with that.
Would they be in violation of having a stolen piece of property in their yard?
Not if they call
Even
us.
if they didn't want it there?
Well, and if I can speak to this, I think no different than anything else that we deal with, there's an investigation that goes into these things, so we would end up talking to the property owner, conduct an investigation into how that came about and how that came to be, and then based on that, we would go forward with however we would normally investigate the case.
And again, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, I suppose if you wanted to get right down to it, the letter of the law would, if they didn't want it and it was within their purview and they were in possession of it, yeah, technically, but that's not what the spirit of the law is being designated for, so.
Yeah, I don't want to, start using officer time for interrogations. And
Sure.
whatnot. Unless they're like, no, by golly, I'm keeping this shopping cart.
I have a question on the daily cart confinement. Are you aware of any businesses in town that do close and are not securing their carts?
No, I'm not.
So right now, everybody is securing their carts. I mean, it's just good business sense. You want them to be there in the morning. Do we have any, I guess we have some establishments that close, like Big R, I guess, would be probably one. I don't think they're open 24 hours, that probably have carts, but they all keep those inside, I believe, as they.
Picar has a cart corral in the parking lot as well.
Mhm.
And
Most, well, I wouldn't say most, I'm going to say all of the retail establishments, they do a pretty good job of locking them up at night.
Okay.
It's just during the day, really, that's when the thefts occur. I've actually watched people walk off property with shopping carts. There's
Right.
nothing I can do about it.
Mayor Pro Tem, if there aren't further questions by council, I know that we have a concerned constituent in the audience. I don't know if Mr. Maleko wanted to address council, if,
Sure.
Is it on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Aaron Maleko. I'd helped start some of this issue, I think. I'm a real estate broker and a landlord of several properties and a resident of Canyon City. Over the last year, I'd say I've personally returned probably 25 to 30 shopping carts, my own. I just throw them in the back of the truck. And they've come from Goodwill, Safeway, City Market, Big R, and Walmart. I don't see much Walmart on this end of town because this is the end of town I live in, but Safeway, probably more than any of them. A couple weeks ago, I had 3 Safeway carts in one day that I returned to Safeway. The guy collecting the carts was very appreciative. I have found shopping carts abandoned in alleys, sidewalks, Veterans Park, Macon Plaza, along the Riverwalk. Actually saw one in the river. I didn't retrieve that one. Under bridges, 9th Street Bridge, after it was burnt down, there was a Goodwill cart under there. At the Clock Tower Plaza, behind the History Center, over by those dumpsters by the History Center, I see those there a lot. And a lot of this has already been covered. I think Commander Bell's done a great job with everything that, addressing every concern that I have about them. I mean, we all know that they look unsightly, but it's also stealing, and there's some confusion in the community about, if you take merchandise out of a store without paying, it's stealing, and taking mail out of mailboxes is stealing, stealing bicycles, taking things out of vehicles is stealing, but when it comes to shopping carts, it just seems like it's condoned, and a lot of that is because some of the citizens in this community feel like, these stores are big organizations that can just afford to lose a cart, but I see them as vital parts of this community, and I think they deserve equal protection from theft, but they should also take some responsibility to make sure their property is secured so it doesn't end up all over town, and I think this ordinance goes a long way towards addressing some of those issues. So I think it's working great. I will just say that I've read a lot of ordinances from a lot of different cities. There are some of them, like Lakewood, for example, that requires each business that has shopping carts to register with the city, a simple one-page form that shows what their cart retention, methods are, just a number of carts that they have, not, an asset tag on each one, but just how many carts they have, and clear contact information for, who to contact when the cart's found, and that they agree to come get the carts. And then that's renewed annually. And then some of the other things that we've talked about, I know like Detroit requires that they weld up a thing on each cart with the identification. I don't think we're going to require that. We're a small town. We only have one Safeway, one City Market. We don't need a store number. But the ones that do have a sign on the shopping cart, because I noticed the same thing that Councilwoman Tracy notices, that it doesn't say what to put on the sign. And what the other cities are doing, they're just saying the name of the store and a number for who to contact for. And if we have that on file in a small town like this, we probably don't need that. And probably the signage that's on the cart is, I can always tell where they come from, because they're always labeled. So, but I think it's a great start, and I really appreciate everybody's work on it. Any questions for me?
Hey,
I
just
really
thanks.
love your Indy shirt, by the way.
I'm just going to say thanks for your cart work. Really appreciate the input on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're kind of our pilot program, apparently.
Well, if I can
And
help going forward, let me
Our
know.
problem would have been way worse if it wasn't for you out there really helping with that. Your Indy shirt is totally awesome,
My shirt.
but
Do you see the back?
oh no. That's how you make the Inye?
Yep.
That's how you get the tilde on there? I love it. But I like your input too on that control plan or whatever is an agreement to come and pick up the carts. Because I'm a little worried that you're going to have this huge pile of carts and they're short-staffed or whatever, and they're not going to come and get them. At least maybe not in a timely manner.
Well, and I think that's why we give them the 30 days. And,
Yeah.
I want to thank you for bringing up the Lakewood ordinance, because that is a cart control plan. That's what he was referring to, in that they have to register it with the city. They talk about how they're going to market or whatever, and then contact information that's updated to allow us to be able to get a hold of people.
Yeah, no.
I
And
have-
the expectation is that you will come and pick these up. Yeah.
Since there are penalties and it's a misdemeanor, do you have any idea if that would be, are there going to be that many going forward, that it would be more of a burden on the court? Because, and the penalty, whatever the penalty is, if it's a fine, most of the people that have these carts aren't going to be able to pay it, right?
Well, that's true regardless,
Yeah.
though, even if they break another law, right?
Right.
So the courts, I happen to know, especially our municipal court, which is where this would be enforced, Judge Allen does a really good job of being able to work with people like that, so long as they're coming to court, and that is going to be the kicker. But he does work with people. If they're indigent, he will, he and Tricia, our city prosecutor, they manage to work things out with folks. And it usually does not hinder them in that particular way, where they get stuck in a cycle, where they can't pay a fine, and then it just keeps going and going and going and going and going. So that would be a question for them, but I've seen it in action, and I don't think that that's going to be an issue.
So it's not, you don't anticipate that many of them? You don't think it's going to be that much of a volume
It will be at first.
at first? Yeah,
Sure.
okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I really appreciate the time and effort that you guys have clearly put into reaching out to so many of the businesses that have shopping carts. I think that there may be a couple. I know Mr. Maleko mentioned that he's found one from Goodwill, for example. So I would just encourage us to make sure that we have a very complete list, so that we've reached out to Goodwill and New Horizons and Ace and any of the other ones that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to go by yet, just to ensure that they're especially, I'm thinking New Horizons, that isn't a big corporate chain that may not have as much experience with this. So they have plenty of time and opportunity for input and opportunity to understand what the new requirements will be.
Sure.
I do have a suggestion, and what my suggestion is that we take the Lakewood document and not put that in our proposed ordinance here, but put it in as a appendix or something like that. I mean, we've done that with penalty amounts so that it could be easily modified later, because I'm troubled about the plan and the requirements for the plan, the daily cart confinement. I mean, if that's an issue, shouldn't that also be then a violation of the code to leave your carts out? And I don't think we need to get there, because we are a small community and we know pretty much what's going on, what people are doing. And I think what we want, what's important to us as the city is to know the things that were included on the Lakewood plan. You know, how many carts did you start out with, you know, and things like that. And who do we contact? So we have that on file, and, you know, a promise from them to come pick up the carts on some reasonable schedule.
Well, and I think there still should be an expectation that we expect that they do control their carts at night. I mean, granted, they are right now, but maybe somebody won't at some point. It's just that just to clarify that this isn't.
And I'm all right with language like that, but I think it's, you know, the business driver there is so strong that if you lose them and it costs you $300 to replace it, that we don't, I'm not sure that we really need an ordinance there to say, don't lose your stuff, it's gonna cost you money, you know?
Catherine has her hand up.
Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, so I'm gonna disagree with Mayor Pro Tem. I'm gonna ask you not to attach any appendixes to ordinances. And we can create the forms and we can bring those back and you can look at them based upon the ordinance language, but the code is really for legislation, and forms and things like that are not legislation. They need to be able to, staff needs to be able to modify those and adjust those things. And if they're an appendix, we have to bring it back to council for an ordinance and change it. And that's a little bit too much, I think, and why you have an administrative staff to handle that.
So maybe I might be confused. What I'm trying to do is keep it on the administrative level rather than having to bring it back to us. And so that's my suggestion. Whether maybe I used the wrong word there, appendix, rather than what you're referring to, I believe. Does that sound right?
It sounds like we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It's just part of procedures, basically.
Yes.
Do we have any other suggestions or concerns about our proposed ordinance? Well, thank you guys for all the work, and thank you also for the work that you've done. I mean, you know, this is kind of the broken window problem. You know, that if you've got the broken windows, it encourages more bad behavior. And if you've got the shopping carts all over the place, it encourages more bad behavior. And so it's important, I think, for us to address this. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we're close to the businesses and listening to them, and, you know, seeking input from citizens. As we attempt to do this, because this, to me, this is, well, like I said, it's the broken window
Absolutely.
syndrome, you know, that this is where there's other bigger issues that this helps us address.
Absolutely, and we have had considerable citizen complaints about the shopping carts this year. This year seemed to be really I won't say magical, but it just seemed to be that this year where it really became an exponential problem, more than usual. I don't know if you've felt that way or not, but
it definitely seems like that particular issue was getting a little bit out of control, and it still is. So,
Yeah, and I don't want to be like oh, well, we can't have homelessness in this and this and this and this, or we can't have shopping carts in this and this and this city, but we can in Canyon City. Yeah. So
Correct.
we're starting to have, and a lot of people say, oh, Canyon City, we never had homelessness problems before. That's true. Well, it's not true. We've had them for many, many years, but it's growing. But it's growing in all of the cities, and we're having to do big city ordinances, big city tools to address it. And it's unfortunate that that's where we've come in Canyon City, but that's where we're at, and we've got to take these measures to protect the safety of our community.
Thank you again, guys, for being here. And if there's no further comments, we're adjourned. Thank you.